Warm greetings, everyone. The past 2 weeks have kept everyone engrossed in the situation of our neighboring country. A peace deal was concluded in February 2020 between the Taliban and the US, culminating in the capture of Afghanistan. In the backdrop of years of strife and bloodshed, the situation there is precarious and affects the whole region more particularly. Today we have invited Mr. Rana Banerji, former IAS with a 37-year stint in bureaucracy. He was a key figure in the national security and policy formation on South Asian region, a distinguished fellow at think tank Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies, New Delhi, to converse with us on Afghanistan, a political quagmire. On behalf of Spark the Peace Builders, I welcome you on board, Mr. Banerjee.
Thank you very much. Let me just correct you. I wasn't a key figure, but I was in the bureaucracy, yes. And I have retired almost 12 years back. So I still keep an eye on the developments as a political analyst. But I have
Thank
little contribution to policy.
Thank you for correcting me, Mr. Banerjee. Mr. Banerjee, I will at the very outset ask you to give us a brief background of Taliban. Who are Taliban?
You see, the Taliban are a group of very dedicated, religious, and ideologically motivated uh, Afghans who actually first collected at the Sangesar White Mosque in Kandahar province of Afghanistan in August 1994. They were trying to organize protests against extortion by criminal gangs which were operating in the highways at that time because there was a little bit of anarchy reigning between the various groups of the Afghan Mujahideen who had come to power in 1992. So to avoid harassment of citizens, there was actually a few bad cases of a young couple from who were going to Herat from Pakistan on the highway, and they were killed, and the lady was raped. And then after that, the citizens of Kandahar were very agitated about it. So they had approached the mosque in Sangesar, this gathering of religious devotees. So they asked Mullah Omar, who was actually a field commander of the Hizb-e-Islami Yunus Khalis group, who had fought against the Russian invaders during the struggle of the Afghan Mujahideen. He had got injury or shrapnel injury in his eye, so one eye he lost. After that, he came back for religious work in the mosques. But he was very well respected person. So he was made the commander of a small group of people who would go and threaten these criminal gangs not to resort to extortion to disturb the common people and the common trade. This is what was happening, and they were quite well regarded by the society. Then there was a case where Pakistan government was sending an official convoy of trucks to Central Asia. This truck convoy was also stopped by one such criminal gang. At that time, the government of Pakistan, the interior minister of the government, Major General retired Nasrullah Babar, who was interior minister in the Benazir government, the second Benazir government, he approached this group under leadership of Mullah Omar to free the convoy without any payment of extortion or taxes. And they were able to help release this convoy. After that, in gratitude, the Pakistan government decided to help them, and that is how the name Taliban came. They moved towards Kabul, and they were able to capture all the territory by giving this message of honest government, no extortion, etc. And at that time, the president of Afghanistan was Burhanuddin Rabbani. He was trying his best to prevent infighting between his defense minister Ahmad Shah Massoud and his prime minister Gulbuddin Hikmatyar. So neither of them were able to patch up with the others, and the government was not functioning. So then the Pakistan government decided to promote the Taliban and help them both militarily and politically to actually proceed and capture or take control of the government in Kabul. This happened in a period of between 94 to 96, sometime in 96. So it took them 2 years. During this period, they were trained to fight militarily by the Pakistani Inter-Services Intelligence Directorate and through one particular officer who was at that time the Consul General of Pakistan in Herat, Colonel retired Sultan Amir Tadar. Now, this man was very, very committed and very good military officer. Plus, after his retirement, he had been, attached with the ISI, and he took the Afghans under his wing and he gave them actual military training over this period. So they were able to capture power and come to power in 1996 and came to be known as the Taliban because initially they had studied as talibs in madrasas in Pakistan, the Binori town madrasa in Karachi, and the Akora Khatak near Naushera, another Haqqaniya madrasa. These were the two main madrasas in which they had studied. And then they had joined this group of Mullah Omar and to go and capture as a militia Kabul.
Their basic image was that of Robin Hoods, a collective group of Robin Hoods trying to salvage Afghanistan from the warlords and from the militia who were extorting and harassing the people. Can we say
Well,
that?
you can say that, you see, but Robin Hood never had a religious
Yes.
motivation or
Apart from
ideological,
their,
apart from that, yes. They were
apart from that,
do-gooders.
they
They
started
wanted
on
to,
a good motive
that's right. They wanted to do good to the people and
to
to
the
avoid corruption and had a high standard of morality prescribed in their uh, objectives. That you can say.
right, sir. So talks about withdrawing NATO forces began in 2012 May. It was agreed that by the end of 2014 they would leave. However, the forces overstayed, and finally in 2020, Trump cut the deal in Doha. He announced an abrupt agreement, which by its very nature is very weak. Even his Mark T. Esper, the defense secretary of Trump, he also remarked that had already remarked that there's no military solution anymore because no one has an appetite for war. Then later on, he went on to say Trump is withdrawing too many forces too soon. What leverage did the deal give Taliban?
Well, you see, the Americans had tried all sorts of military tactics in the period that you mentioned. There was a great deal of growing fatigue about the deployment of American forces inside Afghanistan along with other NATO country forces. So the deal really, though it had many conditions or specifications in the written agreement, actually turned out to be a deal to enable the Americans to withdraw. The aspect of peace or inclusive governance in Afghanistan fell by the wayside because there was a strong domestic pressure on the Americans to withdraw all their forces as quickly as possible. And this was exploited in a manner of speaking by the Taliban as their leverage because they knew that they are bound to withdraw soon. So they kept giving conditions which they never fulfilled, but they demanded their own conditions, such as release of prisoners, and they never agreed to a ceasefire. Then they said we will have intra-Afghan talks, but the talks got bogged down in theories, or it never progressed beyond the point to actually involve all Afghans. So that is how it turned out, and it played into the hands of the Taliban. Also, it was eventually little bad for the image of the government of President Biden because the withdrawal turned out to be very unruly, and it caused a lot of panic among common Afghan people who had actually lived for the last almost 16 years to enjoy the fruits of democracy and development. also women's rights. So all of a sudden, all these gains were jeopardized overnight. So there was panic among the common people in Afghanistan, and nobody seems to have planned for this type of situation developing, because the Afghan National Army collapsed very quickly. Again, nobody had felt that it would collapse so soon. So it eventually all played into the hands of the Taliban. Even they did not expect to achieve this so quickly. So that is where it stands now. The Taliban have come into power, but they have to consolidate and they have to gain the confidence of the people of Afghanistan, so that the panic stops and people stop, trying to escape in every which way. Wherever they are able to find a way, they are trying to leave the country because they fear retribution from the Taliban.
Right, sir. So when Trump went into making of this deal with the Taliban, he had even called them privately, the Taliban, to his abode. Wasn't Trump made aware of the repercussions of this deal, or was he just in a rush to fulfill an election campaign promise?
Well, he was definitely made aware of the repercussions. The Taliban in 2012 were designated as terrorists by USA, and several of the top leaders now they are still designated as terrorists. So they cannot travel. If they travel, they can liable to be arrested. Their finances have been frozen. All these things were well known. Still, the domestic pressure to withdraw was so great that Trump authorized his special envoy, Zalmay Khalilzad, who was previously, he's an Afghan, but he
Right.
went on a student scholarship to America, settled and became an American national. Later on became America's ambassador to not only Afghanistan, but later on also to Iraq. But he came back and he tried to sell this deal very quickly. Even when there was a change in government in America, the Democrats came to power. Uh, they retained Mr. Khalilzad as their envoy. So, in retrospect, it may not have been such a sound decision for uh, Joe Biden in terms of his domestic political rating. But the phenomenon of American withdrawal, this was bound to happen. So, that is the situation as of now.
But it happened very, very quickly, sir, and they did not put in any such clause in the deal itself which would have deterred Taliban from proceeding according to their will. It's a win-win situation only for Taliban, and gives, and by way of the agreement, they have the U.S., the NATO forces have been just allowed to withdraw from Afghanistan. That's the crux of the whole deal itself.
That
Sir
you are right
Hussain,
about.
thank you, sir. Hussain Haqqani, who is the former Pakistani diplomat to US, also said about this agreement between the US and Taliban that there is no element of peace in the agreement itself. How far would it be correct, sir, to say that there is no element of peace in the agreement, Doha agreement?
Uh, I would say broadly, the way it panned out and it enabled the Taliban to get all what they wanted without giving anything much in return. That this description meets the situation, and I have very high respect for uh, Mr. Hussain Haqqani as an academic and a very brilliant man at that. He has written some excellent books uh, on
With regard to Afghanistan, Pakistan also, sir.
mainly on Pakistan and
Mainly on Pakistan.
military and the mullah, and then in he was also in politics, and he was a member of the uh, People's Party of Pakistan. Initially, as a student, he was a member of the Jamaat-e-Islami. He grew up as a young ideologue of the Jamaat-e-Islami, but then in his intellectual transition, he became a,
Diplomat.
Democrat, a Democrat advocating withdrawal of army domination from politics in Pakistan, which is why he became unpopular with the Pakistan army. And today he's in a position where There are cases against him. He cannot come back to his own country. So he has been in America for a long time, and he is heading the Hudson Institute, which is a very prestigious think tank there. Even his wife, who belongs to a very, very eminent family of Pakistan, she also has written a book about the condition of minorities in Pakistan. And Isfahani. And Mr. Isfahani was a businessman who established the Roosevelt Hotel. He purchased the Roosevelt Hotel in uh, America. So that became the uh, actual building where the Pakistan embassy started functioning from. So to that extent, uh, that Haqqani, when he came back as ambassador to America, he and his wife were able to live in the same house which Mrs. Haqqani's father had purchased. So these are ironies. Now they cannot come back to their own country. So this is an
So, sir,
irony of history.
we can very well say that Mr. Hussain Haqqani's statement that this agreement, Doha agreement, does not have an element of peace, is not just rhetoric. He is saying it out of experience and uh, basically because he's aware of all the circumstances that Afghanistan is faced with the Taliban rule.
You see, I would add that it is prescient. Prescient means it shows portents of the future, because he has given a hint that there will be more civil strife in Afghanistan as a result, because the intra-Afghan dialogue, which was prescribed in this agreement or in this deal, never happened.
That's
So
missing.
unless there is an effort by the Taliban to include other, may not be like-minded, but other Afghans who have tasted the fruits of education, democracy, human rights, women's rights, if they are not brought into an inclusive power-sharing structure, there may be peace, may be short-lived in Afghanistan.
Right, sir. Right, sir. So, under the Resolute Support Mission, NATO forces were to provide support and training to the Afghan security forces. Now, if they were trained adequately, then why was Afghan military not able to brace up against this capture? They completely surrendered. Is it lack of will to fight or just loss of morale? Even the all-powerful line of Herat also was sublimed. What's your opinion on that, sir?
This is a very complex question, and why it happened is also it's a complex phenomenon which happened. The Afghan National Army was never really trained in the context of a typical army that should have infantry, that should have armor, that should have mobile, complements. But they were trained initially sort of as a counter-terrorism force, as a force which could go and react to situations and restore control of certain areas which remained under the government's control. So the provincial capital towns they were able to control, and in the rural areas their writ was not easily enforceable. So they had air support, which was mainly being given by the Americans. Also, the Afghan uh, pilots were well trained, but they were not able to have technical support to repair their aircraft in time. Then there were several moral problems, as you say, within the Afghan National Army. There were the officer class was mainly initially uh, leadership of the officer class was by Tajiks, whereas Pashtuns were the common soldiers. Later on, a lot of Pashtuns also were brought into the officer class by promotions and all. But again, there was a typical phenomenon of Afghan tribal society which kept asserting in the situations on the ground which the army faced. When two groups of army Afghans face each other, uh, they always come to some sort of a deal to see which group is more powerful, and then without fighting, the group which is less powerful agrees to surrender in front of the group which is more powerful if a promise is given that there will be no retribution. So this progressively happened as the Taliban were able to surround the areas which were under control of the Afghan National Army. And because the Americans had already said they are going to withdraw, the leaders of the Afghan National Army found that their forces were not willing to fight. So, so this is the reason: lack of leadership, drop in morale, corruption within the army. There was a lot of money which was being given to buy equipment, to buy petrol, which was being parceled out for other personal gain by some of the officers. They were not
There's a
being
report
disciplined.
also, sir. There's a report also on those misappropriations. Sir, so
Yeah.
in a way, you are trying to say that the traditional traditions, the tribal traditions within the Afghan society, they have a telling effect on the society, how they behave, and even on the army.
Yes, and
Is that
also
correct?
the ethnic. Yes, the ethnic
Yes.
divisions also. Ethnic divisions also.
Okay, sir.
Though this was not openly admitted. So, in the Afghan leadership never said that the Pashtuns who didn't like the Tajiks, but in effect there were these divisions which also contributed to lack of morale in the army.
Right, sir. So, would it be okay to say that the U.S. morale, U.S. military morale was also had also slumped because of this unending fight with the Afghan Taliban?
You see, there was a strong constituency for peace in the rural areas also, even among the urban areas. When there were calls for ceasefire during, say, Eid, then even the wives of the Taliban leaders sometimes came onto the streets, first, urging their, you know, husbands to stop fighting or to extend the ceasefire. But uh, this did not last, or this pressure from the civil society, from the women, was not sufficiently sustained to prevent the fighting. So, but there was a fatigue, peace fatigue. You can say everybody wanted peace. So that is also one of the contributory factors.
Both sides, sir, the U.S. as well as the Afghan side. Afghan, obviously, they have been fighting all the decades now. The U.S. has been there for the past 20 years or so. How would
Yes.
you assess the security situation there now, sir? There was a bomb blast recently. Another one also. The U.S. has also said that they will be bombing all these combatants there. How do you assess the security situation there now?
Well, you see, the Taliban have come into power. One aspect is that there is considerable fear both in the rural areas and in the urban cities, that, like in their last dispensation, they may resort to retribution and ruthless killing of all their opponents, though they have said they won't do it. But there have been night searches and searching for opponents, some execution. So this has not been totally prevented by the leadership. Some local field commanders, in their zeal, have still been doing this type of thing. So this has caused panic among the common Afghan people, for one. Secondly, there are some small terrorist groups other than the Afghan Taliban who have been also operating in this area. The Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan is a group of Pakistani, mostly Pashtun, but some Punjabis also, who have been attacking the Pakistani army establishment by locating themselves in Afghan territory. This has been happening since uh, almost 2010-11, almost 9-10 years. So, although
Yeah.
there have been operations by the Pakistan army in the federally administered tribal areas, and some of these people have escaped into Afghanistan, but they have the same religious affiliation as the Afghan Taliban. And in the past, the Afghan Taliban have had a tradition of never giving up on their religious friends. Osama bin Laden was not surrendered to the Americans in 1997-96. At that time, if they had agreed to surrender Osama bin Laden to the Americans, maybe the Americans may not have come in at all. But they refused. Mullah Omar refused, because in tradition of Pashtuns, if somebody takes their refuge in their safety, then they have to save that person. So similarly, some of these tribe groups, the terrorist groups, have the same ideology from which the Afghan Taliban also stem, and they have fought together in the war against the Americans and the Afghan National Security Forces. So they will not immediately uh, discipline the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, although the Pakistan army would want this, but they may be reluctant or unable to control them. Also, there is this remnant of the Daesh or the Islamic State. There are some elements, again, mostly Pakistani. There could be some Arabs or some Syrians who are there in the group also, but they are having small pockets of influence in eastern or southeastern Afghanistan. Now, they may also try to take actions against whatever their objectives are. There is the East Turkmenistan Islamic movement that is protesting against the treatment of Muslims in Chinese Xinjiang. Then there are the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan. They also have a tradition of having hidden in these areas bordering Afghanistan and Pakistan. So all these elements may be still acting in small ways, but the Taliban will find it difficult to discipline them. So the possibility of continuing civil strife in this region cannot be ruled out.
Right, sir. So the US and the Vietnam had signed peace accords in 1973, which was known as the Paris Peace Accord. Is there a similitude to Doha peace deal and the Vietnam peace accords? The deal that Paris deal was signed by this legendary Henry Kissinger. So, do you see a similitude?
No, I don't. I don't. This was a
Or the
different circumstance, completely
situations are
different.
similar? So, the situations are growing similar, sir? The Vietnamese
Not
situation and the
no,
Afghan
no,
situation.
no.
You don't
I
see any
wouldn't.
similarity, sir.
No, it is only a sort of political weapon to embarrass, President Biden. Some of his Democrat of opponents from the Republican Party, they may try to show this similarity, but in actual fact, the circumstances are totally different, and this is a unique situation, which hasn't been dealt perhaps to the manner of complete satisfaction as the Americans would have liked. The withdrawal has not been orderly. That can be said.
Right, sir. Right, sir. President Biden, just a note on this. President Biden just stood by a deal that was basically cut by Trump. He did not rescind it. That's to that extent we can say that he could have made some more clauses, added some more, renegotiated the deal. To that
You
extent,
see,
we may say that.
this, this is again a simplistic understanding of the events. Both Biden as vice president and earlier President Obama, they had intense, deep knowledge about the Afghanistan problem and the Afghanistan situation. So they have been trying to work out a manner of withdrawal which would not leave egg on the face of the Americans. It just so happened that it didn't work out like that. But basically, both the Republicans and both the Democrats, they were committed to withdraw and take out the forces from Afghanistan because they felt there was no the possibility of a military solution. To that extent, you see, not much difference was there. Rather, I would say that as leaders, both President Obama and President Biden have a much better understanding of the problems that exist in Afghanistan. Uh, Trump's attention span or his personal knowledge of the whole situation was just not there. He just had a broad idea that he must come out at all costs,
Right, sir.
and
Right.
tried to do that.
He just focused on one particular point that Americans have to be out, and that was it. In between the what he could be negotiated for the best interest of the Afghanistan and for everyone concerned, that
Yeah,
is lacking there. So will Taliban
and
be
the
able to? Yes,
sorry,
sir.
yeah,
Please
please.
go on. Please go on, sir. Please,
No,
you were saying.
I was only mentioning about Zalmay Khalilzad. You see, he changed his spots till when he was when he was US ambassador in Afghanistan, he was very much anti-Pakistani in his outlook. But to get this deal concluded before his time ran out, before the Republicans lost in the election, and then later on he was of course retained by the Democrats. But he overnight changed his whole orientation and tried to tell the Taliban that he is now very much pro-Taliban and he is pro-Pakistan, and he behaved in this manner, which of course ultimately uh, did not do so much for his own credibility. But apart from that, the deal was done.
Deal was done, sir. Deal was cut with Taliban because even Taliban
Yes.
were very skeptical of the deal until Zalmay Khalilzad had signed the deal. After that, it was signed by Mullah Baradar. Only then did he sign the deal
Well,
later on.
they had the better of the Americans in the whole process,
Yes,
as it unfolded during the last 1 year.
that's the only takeaway from the deal. Taliban got their way.
That's right.
So will Taliban be able to confederate all their factions? Because Taliban, as such, Afghanistan has numerous factions. The Haqqanis, many factions are there. Will they be able to confederate? Because that's where the power structure will build. If they are able to confederate all these factions together,
You see, that
what's
is
your
a
take
very
on this?
difficult. That's a very difficult question for me to answer. It will only time will tell. You see, what has happened is that uh, Haibatullah Akhundzada became the emir of the Taliban in 2016. The period immediately before that, Mullah Akhtar Mansoor was the previous emir. Now he was killed in a very peculiar manner. He was coming back from Iran and he was killed by a US drone. His taxi was completely burned and his dead body also could not be much identified. But near the taxi, his passport in the name of Muhammad Abdul Wali, by which he was known to be traveling,
Known
that
to
was
be
found that was found intact near the taxi. Now this
right.
raised suspicions that did he just throw the passport out, or it was in the hands of the ISI and
And
they deliberately had tipped off the Americans to eliminate him because
right,
they did not like him to become more independent and he was becoming closer to Iran and he had
right.
taken some money and he had bought some properties in Iran which maybe the Pakistani government did not like. After that,
Ultimately,
Mr. Habatullah Akhundzada came to power. Now he had known the background of the faction fighting between the Taliban, the opponents of Mullah Akhtar Mansoor. So when he became the Amir, the two deputy Amirs were appointed, both son of former leader Mullah Omar, Mullah Muhammad Yaqub, and Sirajuddin Haqqani of the Haqqani network. They were made the two deputy Amirs. Then at that time, Mullah Biradar was under custody of the Pakistanis from 2010 onwards. He had been
right.
taken under custody because there were reports that he had wanted to talk directly to President Karzai in Afghanistan and he was open to a dialogue, opening a dialogue with the Americans for peace, which was not approved initially by the ISI, by the Pakistani government. So they had taken him under custody and they kept him in jail for 8 years. It was only when Zalmay Khalilzad started negotiating with the Taliban leadership in Doha that they said that because Mullah Brother was one of the founding members and also reportedly his wife and Mullah Omar's wife were sisters, that he should be released. He has a certain stature. So then he was released in 2018. And the last 2 years, he has been in the negotiating front of the negotiating process. So there was
Right.
faction, but Haibatullah Akhundzada has adopted a conciliatory style of leadership. He has taken or tried to take all the factions together. So far, what are the acting cabinet appointments that have been announced also indicate this effort to have a compromise accommodating various factions of the Taliban in the evolving power structure, though it is not very clear what sort of power structure this will be.
Right, sir. So, do you think this Taliban, as a force, they are administratively apt?
Well, they have become quite politically savvy and mature from the last experience. So one has to assume that they will be able to be administratively capable. Also, they will be guided very closely by their Pakistani friends, as had happened last time. So the only problem will be for them to gain international recognition. And for that, you see, they have to give an appearance of being an inclusive government, of taking all the Afghans together with them. So far, that has been their major obstacle. They are unable to share power effectively with others, and also the issue of women's rights and democracy. How much they will freedoms they will allow in the society. That again is a question mark, which will determine international recognition, because if they do not get international recognition, then financial aid will not be forthcoming, and without financial aid, the problems of administration and governance in Afghanistan are immense. So the Taliban have a lot of money from drug trafficking or local taxation in the areas that have been under their control, but still they will need international support to be able to settle down. That is the problem.
Right, sir. So, they do need technical and skilled professionals to run the affairs of the nation, be it manning of the airports, banking, teaching, communication, trading, anything and
Every
everything that runs the
they do
country.
need, they do
Right, sir.
need, and that is they have been appealing to the Afghans who are in a hurry to leave, that they should not leave the country, and they would be like using or needing their expertise and to run the administration. But because of the fear factor, and because of the fear of retribution by zealots, by local Afghan Taliban commanders who are not able to be controlled so easily, because they have done the actual fighting. The old leaders have not done the actual fighting. So this may be a problem which they will have to confront sooner than later, the Taliban. And so far they are trying. It seems they are trying to control the situation.
Right, so they are trying to control this brain drain, and it will seriously really affect their capabilities to for nation building of Afghanistan. The state
That's
institutions have in Afghanistan, I guess, have to be rebuilt now. Who will play the chief influencer role locally and internationally?
well, again, this is difficult to foresee at this stage. Obviously, the Taliban
What
leadership
does your
concept.
analysis? What does your analysis of the subjects say, sir? Who will be the chief influencer in their building their state institutions?
Well, I think the government of Pakistan will be the chief influencer. They will have a leadership council. They will want some sort of a legal or constitutional recognition for the Amirat, the Islamic Amirat of Afghanistan. The problem is that there is no constitutional document which will uh, incorporate this concept. Also, they will want Sharia law to be recognized in some sort of a legal framework. So, this is what they are trying to work out. As against this, they will also need international recognition. So, this has to be negotiated with prominent major powers in the region and also in the West. So, USA, China, Iran, Russia, all these countries will have a role to play, and the Taliban will have to take some steps which restore their image and confidence, not only internally but externally. So this is going to be a difficult process. What sort of division of power they may have is difficult to say. If you go by their last experience, there was a leadership council, and the Amirul Mominin, he never took part in actual administration or implementing the governance. Mullah Omar preferred to stay in the background in Kandahar. So if Habatullah Akhundzada now
It's
does the
also
same
on
thing,
the
or
my
if
friend
Mullah
says
Barat,
it's not coming on the forefront.
Sorry.
Again, Mullah Hebatullah is not coming on the forefront, sir. He is somewhere in the
Yeah.
background.
So far, yes. And Mullah Biradar is the face of the
Right,
Taliban
Taliban.
leadership at present.
Right.
But how it will pan out, because all the cabinet posts have been announced as acting defense minister, acting interior minister, acting intelligence chief. Now, these are people from different Taliban factions who have been actually engaged in the fighting and the influence in various places. So, how this pans out will have to be seen. You cannot speculate or you cannot give answers in a vacuum unless you see how actually, as a
Things
political
are-
analyst, you have to see how these things work out, and you have only some indicators from which you can assess. So it's a work in progress. We will have to see how it goes.
Definitely will have to see how things pan out because transition from a liberal democracy to Sharia is completely different, and we'll
Yes.
definitely be seeing how things pan out in this span of
Yes.
time now. But even
Especially
if
about rights of women. They have been used to certain liberties, certain freedom of action, certain capacity building. They have been actually working in various levels of governance. So suddenly to say that there will be no women will make it very difficult for the people of Afghanistan.
But they have not said that women will be totally banned from working. They have said that we'll see, we'll uh,
Yes,
discipline
yes,
our forces also, and we'll see in what fields they will be working. It is not going to be as open as it was during the previous government, Ashraf Ghani's government. Now things will be completely different. Of course, they will not be as free as they used to be. We'll see to
correct.
that how things shape up. Even if,
That's
as you said, sir, Pakistan may have a role, if Pakistan really plays that role of grooming and influencing the Taliban restructuring its institutions, though the Taliban, the Afghans, have categorically downplayed this rhetoric, even Amrullah Saleh, the erstwhile vice president of Afghanistan, he also said something, echoed something of similar from Panjshir province, where he is taking refuge at present. He has not been able to even tweet since yesterday because the net facilities have been cut off to Panjshir, and he
right.
has been ranting too much against Taliban, sir. In his presence, or that of Hamid Karzai or Dr. Abdullah, is that their presence of any consequence, sir? In while Taliban are restructuring their government structure, because Taliban don't trust them. What about Sir Ahmed Jalali also, sir, or Mullah Mansoor or others, sir? Is their presence of any consequence? What does your analysis say, sir?
As regards Amrullah Saleh, he is totally opposed to the Taliban.
Completely.
He will never, yeah, he will never make a political compromise with them. There may be an effort at temporarily solving the problem of Panjshir by offering some sort of safeguards to Ahmad Masood, the son of late Ahmad Shah Masood, by giving them some assurances that they will not be disturbed or they will be allowed some freedom. But it's difficult. I don't foresee the Taliban forgiving them or giving up on the attempt to capture Panjshir. But Panjshir, in defense terms, it is very easy to defend. It's a very strong fortress, like because of its geographical location. And
But sir, how
if
long?
it if
Pardon me for interrupting you. How long can they resist? Because Taliban is a bigger force. They can't survive on their own without supplies, and maybe they are fortressed by because it's a mountainous region. But I don't see them resisting for quite a long time.
well,
They
they
may
were
not
able to
collapse.
resist the Russians for a long time, and of course, the situation was disturbed in the northern areas at that time. Now, there are also indications that old northern leaders like General Dostum or Ustad Atta from Mazar-e Sharif, from Jauzjan and Samangan provinces, they may also uh, come to some sort of unity to oppose the Taliban. It may not happen or it may happen. Ismail Khan originally tried to oppose them from Herat. He was captured by the Taliban, but then released because he enjoys certain support from the government of Iran. So he went to Iran, then has maybe come back. So some sort of deal making will be there with some of these leaders. As regards Karzai and Abdullah, they are trying their utmost to try to get the Taliban to give them some role in the settling down process, in the political sharing of power. But so far, the Taliban have only engaged in talking to them. They have not given any indication that they will be prepared to share power with them. Personally, I don't see either Karzai or Abdullah getting a very prominent role in the future power dispensation. They may be put up or accommodated as figureheads. Also, some Hazara and Tajik leaders who have now gone to Pakistan, they are staying there. Yunus Kanuni, then the brothers of Ahmad Shah Massoud, Zia Massoud, and uh, uh, another younger brother. So they are all in Pakistan. Under what safeguards will they come back to their original areas in Badakhshan or in Takhar or even in Kabul? So all this remains to be seen. And the role of the Pakistani government will be quite crucial in exerting some pressure on the Taliban to accommodate such elements. But given the nature of the Taliban from their past history, I do not assess that they will be very easily
Convince.
accepting the power sharing formula of this nature. But they would want also international recognition. So maybe to begin with they might, but then later on they will establish full control without disturbing the peace to the extent possible.
Right, sir. That's their motivation right now is what we have been seeing since 15th of August. They do not want to disturb peace. That's there. The element is there definitely, and they don't even trust these people. So I don't see them sharing power with Taliban. Maybe, as you said, they may be figureheads only. So Taliban are basically Afghan natives who have struggled against the Soviets, then the US-led NATO forces, to get control of their land since decades now. Now their aim is fulfilled. We can see it. They are there in the power. Does this control give Pakistan the same strategic depth that they have been boosting off in the past, uh, as they have said that Pakistan has always been saying, their army generals have always said that Afghanistan gives Pakistan the strategic depth. Will the presence of Taliban really continue to give them that strategic depth?
Again, this is a complex question to answer. In the short term, definitely the Pakistan army, by supporting the Taliban, have achieved their primary objective of keeping Indian influence out of Afghanistan. This was their more fear that they would be surrounded by Indians on both sides of their borders. So, to that extent, temporarily now they are going to, they have already been exulting in the victory of the Taliban. It's a sort of objective which they have been pursuing for very long. But there are more factors other than just the fact of the Indian influence having decreased for the time being in Afghanistan. What has happened is that a religious force, a prominently ideological and religious Pashtun force has come into power. Now, Pashtun nationalism has been something that has not been totally quelled ever, and there is an element of Pashtun nationalism which affects Pakistan areas also. The Khyber Pakhtunkhwa area, the Pakhtun Tahaffuz movement, as you know, is a peaceful movement where they are objecting to the displacement that was done under the army operations in Pata. The people displaced are settled in Dera Ismail Khan and Peshawar. They have not been able to go back to their original tribal areas because the army has not enabled any administrative measures enabled to this happen. So the feeling of Pashtun nationalism has not been totally quelled. In the past, the Pakistan establishment, the military establishment particularly, has been more comfortable to promote Pashtun religious identity as different from Pashtun national identity. Yet it is a characteristic of Afghans that they do not like too much domination for too long. The streak of independence within Afghan community in all their ethnic communities is very strong. So sooner or later it will reassert. Even the Afghan Taliban, they may not be too happy about too much Pakistani control. At the moment they are able to not raise their voices because their families are in Pakistan. Their children are studying in schools in Pakistan. Whenever commanders are getting injured, they are getting treatment in hospitals in Pakistan. All these things will gradually change. So then the Pashtun, Afghan Pashtun, will resent too much domination by the Pakistan army. If you read book of Mullah Zaif, who was the ambassador of the Taliban in uh, period 2001-2002, in the last dispensation when they were in power. At that time, he was the ambassador of the Taliban in Pakistan. But he was arrested and he was handed over to the Americans. He was taken to the Guantanamo prison as a terrorist. And he was released only later when the Americans could not find anything about terrorism in him. He has now distanced himself from the Taliban, but he is still a very respected leader, personality. His book is called My Life with the Taliban, and it was given in translation in English to two uh, Scandinavian scholars who went and took translation from him. Now, he has been very critical of excessive Pakistani domination on the Afghans. So, this sentiment will be there, and the Pakistani military, in dealing with the Taliban, will have to be very careful that they do not,
Meddle too
instigate.
much.
Yeah, they do not, arouse too much, you know, hostility of the Taliban. So it will be a difficult process of adjustment, which we'll again have to observe. Yeah.
Yes. So Taliban, uh, given the circumstances that Taliban are now in power, Pakistan has closed its Torkham crossing that borders Afghanistan. How perilous is Taliban for Pakistan's stability?
No, this is going to be a
There is
flexible.
triumphalism.
They have done
There is
fencing. They have done.
triumphalism
They
in Pakistan, but despite that, they have closed the Torkham crossing that borders Afghanistan. So,
crossing will keep opening and closing. You see, there are two or three crossings. They cannot keep them closed. The Chaman
right,
crossing and the Torkham crossing, these are very important for trade. So it
right,
will be there. But the Pakistanis have built a fence to prevent unauthorized crossing by Afghan refugees. So if the situation remains peaceful in Afghanistan, in the rural areas, then there will be not so much of refugee influx into Pakistan. Rather, those Afghans who have been settled in refugee camps in Pakistan, both in Peshawar and in Quetta, they will want to go back to their original homes inside Afghanistan. So the reverse process it will be important also for Pakistan to try the reverse, start the reverse process because the economy of Pakistan is not very good. Neither the economy of Afghanistan is very good. So these will be the real problems of governance which will confront both the countries. Now,
right. So, apart from that, how perilous is Taliban for Pakistan's stability? What are your feelers? What, because of your intricate knowledge, how do you analyze this?
how
How do you
perilous?
analyze? How do you analyze it, sir? How perilous is Taliban actually for Pakistan's stability? We know TTP is functioning within Pakistan. So, in that context, what are your feelers with regard to this particular
You
question?
see, the Taliban will not openly antagonize Pakistan for the foreseeable future till they settle down. Yet they will not be too speedy in acting against their religious ideologue friends, the TTP and other outfits who have the same religious fundamentalist ideology. They will not attack them. So it will be a intricate balancing act they will say we are trying to do, but they will not do much. So they will be more concerned to settle down and get the reins of power, function properly, provide good governance to the people, attend to the economic problems, attend to reviving the administrative institutions. These are all going to be very pressing problems for the Taliban. So their attention will be focused on these things, and they will need the help and guidance of the Pakistani authorities to do a good job in this regard.
So Pakistan need not be antagonized or need not be afraid of Taliban coming within their territory, functioning.
Well,
They have no
that risk will remain. The risk of attacks by Tehrik-e-Taliban or the Islamic State of Khorasan, ISKP, there will be this risk of some stray terrorist attack by them into Pakistani territory. But the Pakistan army will have to remain alert to handle these things, and they will need some, intelligence sharing with the Taliban, Afghan Taliban, to be able to control these.
So we can conclude that Taliban will keep their hands off all these activities and they'll concentrate just on their nation building. That can be safely concluded for the present.
Yes.
Okay, sir. So one very significant point, sir. India had bilateral ties and major trade relations with Afghanistan that dates back to 1950s. It has invested around $3 million in trade, dams, roads, electric transmission lines, solar techniques, and communications. Various different activities it has invested into Afghanistan. How do you see, sir? Do you see a change, a political change there?
No, you see, for the time being, there will be hands off till we wait and see how the Taliban uh, behave. They will actually want us to continue some of the unfinished projects and come back sooner than later and have a, you know, diplomatic presence in Afghanistan. We will have to see when we should do this, because in the past we have had reason to suffer at the hands of the Taliban, both during the IC 814 aeroplane hijack, which went to Kandahar, and also on two or three occasions of attacks on our embassies. One particularly severe attack on our embassy in 2008 or 9, I think, when we lost our defense attaché and a senior diplomat, a counselor there, due to bomb blast at the gate of the embassy. This had been planned by the Sirajuddin Haqqani network at that time, and there was, conclusive evidence in this regard, which was shared by the Afghan intelligence with everybody who was interested. The Americans also know about. So we have this reservation. So in the past, this has happened to us also in Jalalabad. Attempts to attack our consulate in Kandahar and in Herat. Several such attempts have been made. So now, of course, the Taliban are assuring us security, and they are saying that India should come back, because there is a certain amount of goodwill that India enjoys because of the policies and our development trust that we have followed in Afghanistan. Firstly, we have worked with the government of the day. It is not through foreign contractors like the Americans. So we have invested in projects which were the perceived need: Salma Dam, transmission line, hospitals, schools, and also we have encouraged medical tourism into India and student scholarships into India, which have created a very good image about what India stands for. And therefore, Afghans would want the Indians to come back sooner than later. So we have to now decide when we will be able to come back in a secure and safe manner, so that our diplomatic missions and properties are safe. Our engineers or teachers or doctors who go back into Afghanistan, their physical security is not threatened. So all these factors will take some time to assess, and then
Right.
I suppose sooner than later India will reassess when to engage or re-engage with the new political dispensation in Afghanistan. Engagement
Right.
may not necessarily mean recognition, but engagement may come at a later date, even before formal recognition. So that's a
Right, sir.
possibility.
I was going to ask you this at a later stage, but since you brought this issue up of recognition and engagement, I'll just follow this. India's approach to Afghanistan has been that of soft power diplomacy through its involvement in infrastructure building, institution building, and strengthening of cultural ties. But now there's this wait and watch policy. We don't see any engagement on the part of Indian government, though Taliban have initially, at the very threshold when they captured Kabul, they said that India can come and complete all their projects. We don't see this, despite this cautious approach of let's see what how things span out, how things just are happening around in Afghanistan, what kind of developments happen there. Why isn't that engagement there? Engagement should have been there because Russia has been prompt, China has been prompt. Leave apart Pakistan, they have affiliations there. Why isn't India, despite um, investing in 34 provinces of Afghanistan, it has not engaged in any manner?
Well,
There
as I
should have
already
been a
explained,
special envoy on this at least to see how things are happening there.
well, this is a viewpoint. I have already given an, a perception why, because of the history.
Apart from
There
that,
is
sir, apart from that,
certain
sir, we just wait and watch policy. Okay, we are apprehensive and we are watching out. But there should have been, in my opinion, I feel there should have been a special envoy who would monitor all these things, all what's happening, because things are changing very, very fast. And India has got huge investments in Afghanistan. It's not to be taken lightly that in all 34 provinces of Afghanistan, India has $3 billion investments. So that cannot be just left in the lurch. We have to see how things are going around. We have to have someone out there, someone to reach out between the people. Do you feel there should have been someone? At least you can answer me that point, sir.
well, in my personal opinion, I think what we have done, there was no other option than to withdraw at this juncture. And it will be up to the new dispensation to take some reassuring steps to enable us to have the conditions there to re-engage or go back. At the moment, there was absolutely no possibility of us remaining there, given the history of uh, the hostility that we have faced in the past.
So what you are suggesting is that there is an ideological barrier between India and Afghanistan that's preventing us from engagement at present until we
Not,
see how.
no, not the ideological barrier. It is more the uh, incidental sort of uh, happenings that have been there in the past, where the Taliban have emerged in a very hostile, role against India, against Indian interests. So some time will be required for that perception to decrease, and the safety of Indian personnel are primary at the moment.
So there,
Something, if something
so
has
there is
gone
that
wrong,
element of so there is that element of trust deficit. Even though Taliban
absolutely,
have softened their stand on India, they have invited India to come and finish their projects. There is that
well,
trust deficit, sir.
absolutely.
Okay, sir. So, given the fact that China and Russia have softened their stand on Taliban, what role do you see both the countries, Russia as well as China, in stabilizing Afghanistan in the region? Because at present, what we see is a turbulence, a political turbulence. So, how will they stabilize these two countries, Russia and China?
Taking Russia first, you see, they had established contact with the Taliban quite some time back, and their motive was at that stage to embarrass the Americans because they had themselves suffered an humiliation in Afghanistan. They wanted the Americans to suffer a similar, if not a worse, humiliation. And for that reason, they had engaged with the Taliban. They were providing them even military assistance in a limited way. So, whatever their calculation was, they did not want the ideological fundamentalism to spread to the near Asian republics where Russian influence prevailed. But given that reservation, they were happy to deal with the Taliban. Now that the Taliban have come to power, they may reassess their equations how peace may develop in Afghanistan. Russian capacity to give economic or financial or even military assistance on a prolonged basis to Afghanistan is limited. Plus, there is also the historical baggage. They will remember there are many Russian mothers who have lost their children in Afghanistan by resistance from the same fundamentalist or ideologically similar uh, elements of the Afghan Mujahideen who briefly came to power.
Sir,
So
but
it will not be very easy
sorry to
relationship. It
interrupt
will
you
be.
here, sir. Sorry to interrupt you here, sir, but they were the occupying force. The Afghans too have similar memories of the occupying force.
True.
So the
That is
historical baggage is both sides, sir.
that is true. But this will hamper the relationship. It will not be a very easy hunky dory relationship. Uh,
Okay.
Similarly, with China, China has never uh, gone in with economic aid in a massive way in a country which is politically unstable. There has been always a very guarded and project oriented approach to financial and economic assistance. Now, they would like to extend their building of roads and initiative to have industrial investments which will connect upwards into Central Asia or even horizontally from into Kazakhstan into Iran. So that possibility will remain, but they have, for instance, they have in the past they have wanted to have mining interest in Aina gold and copper mines, but apart from bidding initially, they have not made any investments so far. So they may do so in the later this period. But to expect very major economic assistance on the scale of what the Western powers are capable of doing would be unrealistic. If they do, it will be a new thing. So I will assess that the Chinese will come with a great deal of caution and फूक फूक के वो पानी पिएंगे इतनी जल्दी वो बहुत ज्यादा असिस्टेंस नहीं देंगे ये दैट इज
बट
माय पर्सनल
एक चीज तो है ना सर कि चाइना जो है वो उनकी इन्वेस्टमेंट्स आप देखिए सीपैक कॉरिडोर को देखिए दैट गोज थ्रू पाकिस्तान पाकिस्तान को मेजर एक फेस प्रोजेक्ट है जो कि चाइना बना रहा है बट
नहीं
इन
दिया है उन्होंने
दैट इफ यू
अनाउंस
सी
किया है बट प्रोजेक्ट का इम्पिटस
वहां
अभी
भी तो कॉन्फ्लिक्ट है सर वहां भी तो
प्रोजेक्ट का
कॉन्फ्लिक्ट है दे आर इन्वेस्टिंग इन कॉन्फ्लिक्ट जोन सर डू यू सी चाइना फिलिंग द शूज ऑफ इंडिया
no there is no parallel you see the Chinese have so far not invested anything in Afghanistan what they have
Not
invested
anything
in
so far. अभी
Pakistan
तक तो नहीं किया sir, but the field is open for them, sir. Now the field is
possibly
open for them.
possibly. But as I'm saying again, to look at the history of the Chinese actions, even in Pakistan, in the CPEC, the pace of investments has slowed down. And that is not merely because of the disturbance in political situation in Pakistan. It is in the nature of things that there are problems in implementation. How much loans Pakistan will be able to repay over what time span. The Chinese are very cautious people. They will not let their money go down the drain. In Afghanistan, the situation will be even more complex. It will be new. How much money can Afghan government, which is of absolutely fledgling nature, be able to absorb initially? So they will have to see and assess this carefully. They will be guided by the Pakistanis. Whatever the Pakistani suggest to the Chinese that this is a good investment, this is a bad investment, they will consult with them and they will act in concert together. Of course, for the benefit of Afghanistan. So that can happen. But this may not.
Definitely, sir. Again, we see Pakistan as a major influencer when
Yes,
foreign investment is going to come
cer-
to Afghanistan. Sir,
certainly. But allow me to complete. It will not
Yes,
erode the goodwill among Afghans for India. That's not going to happen. So that will enable us to re-engage at a moment of our choosing when we feel that it will be safe for us to do so, and there are assurances from the new government in Afghanistan are considered to be more than just face value statements. At that time, we may be in a position to engage with them and resume our general developmental interests and trust into that area. But that will not happen now. It may take some time.
right, sir. So you are suggesting that Taliban's assurances at present cannot be taken just on their face value. We need more concrete, actionable assurances.
Absolutely.
Now, who has got greater punch in the region of Afghanistan, China or Russia?
I would say neither. It is Pakistan which has the greatest influence now in
Leaving
Afghanistan.
apart, leaving apart Pakistan, who has got greater punch, China or Russia?
Neither, neither. They have limited interests and limited influence. You are reckoning without Iran. Iran also will be a major player in many
Definitely, sir.
parts.
But Iran has got sanctions of U.S. sanctions, UN sanctions on it, and Iran is in a very peculiar state. Indian trade with Iran has also suffered. We know how Chabahar uh, has suffered. And there, I would suggest, sir, that the Delaram Zaranj roadway, that's 218-kilometer roadway highway that connects Afghanistan to Iran. That was a key project, sir, for India. That has also suffered, sir. I feel personally that the dream bubble has been pricked, hasn't it been, sir?
Well, it's a point of view. I don't think so. The Dilaram Zaraj Highway is a major achievement, both for India and for Afghanistan, and it has opened up the possibility of trade through an alternative route. The portion between Zaranj and the Iranian coast is still underdeveloped. There are no roads
That's what
or
I was
no
saying, sir.
proper roads. Allow me to complete. No proper
Yes,
roads. Also, the main railway grid of the Iranian railways, which is fairly developed, it is not connected to the Iranian border near Zaranj. So there has to be a railway line that has to be built. And Indian company was had bid for this project, but so far it has not got it. So these are other extraneous issues which will be connected to the overall development of this region. And the irony is that neither Russia nor China nor Iran are in a very economically comfortable position. You can say China is in an comfortably
China is
economic
better
position.
off.
China definitely has better economic strength, but the history of Chinese investments in any other country has to be seen before you can decide that they will just jump into Afghanistan. They are not going to do that. They will assess very carefully. Project-wise assistance programs will be developed, and there may be assistance forthcoming there. But this will not happen overnight. It will be a slow process.
Right, sir. This cannot be assessed at this point. We'll have to see how things
Yeah,
go further. And only
certainly,
then we'll see people coming and investing. We have to see how this government formation takes place in Afghanistan.
quite correct.
So, one similar question I would like to ask you on this point only Russia and China, they are a budding partnership also, but they are significant rivals to US also. In the wake of Afghanistan, how do you see China and Russia balancing their interests in the region? Because China is building itself as a superpower of the region and it's a tough competitor to US. Now, given this equation, how do you see the Russia and China balancing their interests in the region?
No, China and Russia will remain close partners in the manner in which they uh, work in Afghanistan. There will not be a competing sort of an interest, but overall capacities to assist may be limited. So that is what I would say. They are happy at the moment that Americans have gone out, but eventually the Taliban themselves would want the lines of financial assistance restored from the West. So to that extent, it will be on the Americans to decide how they want to come in.
So now we conclude this significant session where Mr. Banerjee has given us very deep insights into the issue of Afghanistan. With that, we fervently hope that Afghanistan is able to build peace and progress in its nation because it's hope that makes us resilient. We at Spark the Peace Builders wish Afghanistan peace. It's a long way to restructuring a nation distraught with death and corruption. We can only affirm our support for an inclusive, altruistic system of governance to be put in place and a true welfare state to be established. Thanks for joining me, Mr. Rana, and all other participants. And thanks for giving us such valuable and deep insights. I call off the meeting.